Farmer came by about 5 minutes later. Said, "Have you guys seen my goat?" They said, "Yeah." About 5 minutes ago, some crazy goat came running through the woods, jumped up in the air, and shot down the hole. That was your goat. Farmer said, "No, it wasn't my goat." He said, "My goat was chained to a railroad tie." You see, sometimes there are things that are connected to certain things that they just tag along, and you might not want them to tag along. Let me tell you what's been happening to you in the public schools for the last 50 years. For the last 50 years, the educators of your age groups from the first grade on up, they have decided that God does not belong in the school. And they have taken God out of the school. And that started about 1960. But as they took God out of the school, some things were connected to God that they didn't really want to lose. Things like good grades. Things like high moral standards. Things like children who believe it's wrong to cheat and to lie and to steal. And when they decided to make God illegal in the schools, they took away from those schools the only standard by which anybody can judge whether something's right or wrong. There's a man named Stephen Jay Gould, and he said this, very famous evolutionist. He said, "Evolution is a fact like apples falling out of trees." Most scientists who believe that they are very well educated believe that evolution is a fact. But do you know what? Even though for the past 50 years the school systems have taught evolution, most people do not believe in evolution. In fact, most people in the country today, about 48%, 40%, believe that God created humans and all of the animals about 10,000 years ago. Another 39% or so believe that God at least started the process. Is there any evidence to prove one way or the other whether God created the heavens and the earth, or whether the heavens and the earth and all of the animals and people that we see evolved? Well, I think that there is proof, and what I'm going to do for you today is give you some proof that shows God is the Creator. First thing we're going to have to do is understand what a law is. Now, when we drive down the road, we all understand what a law is when we see on the side of the road where it says speed limit 70 miles an hour. We understand that a group of legislators somewhere got together and said, we think it would be best if on this road people went 70 miles an hour and no faster. How many of the people in here, the legislators would say, think that's best? And they would all vote, and that's what happens. Maybe they would vote on which places we should put a stop sign, or which places we should put a green light. Maybe they vote on things like that, and the law is that you have to stop when the light is red, you can go when the light is green. Those are laws that our government makes. But there are some things known as scientific laws that aren't made like that. You see, a scientific law is something that happens in every case, and we observe it and we name it, but we don't create it. It's already been created by someone. For instance, you guys all understand this, the law of gravity. You know, suppose I take my keys out of my pocket and I drop them. Suppose I do it again. Suppose I stand here for the next hour and a half and drop my keys. Are they ever going to go up? Not unless I throw them. If I just drop my keys, the law of gravity is going to pull them down at 9.8 meters per second squared every single time I drop them. But now suppose that we didn't like that law. Suppose we said, I'm not really happy with the law of gravity. I would like to change that. And so we got 1 million of the most brilliant scientists in all of the world, and we parked them right here at Hickory Knoll, and we said, guys, we've decided we're not happy with the law of gravity. We'd like to change it. And they said, well, we're not really happy with the law of gravity either. Glad you brought us together. Let's vote on it. So I said, great, let's do. Everybody in favor of changing the law of gravity, raise your hand. And so all of these 1 million brilliant scientists, they all raised their hand. And I say, okay, we have just changed the law of gravity. That is wonderful. Now, I need a volunteer to step off a 20-story building to demonstrate that it's changed. Are we going to have a volunteer like that? No, because it doesn't matter if we get 1 million scientists or 2 million or 4 million or 6 billion people. If we all vote to change the law of gravity, is that going to change it? Never going to change it. There are some scientific laws that do not change that point to a creator. One of them is the most basic scientific law there is. It's called the law of cause and effect. Now, pretty self-explanatory. Most of you understand the law of cause and effect. Here's what it says. For every material effect, there has to be a cause that came before it, and that was greater than it. Very easy to understand. For instance, suppose that we were to go, let's just say I was standing up here and I was speaking to you and you were listening so well like you are now, and I had this song book and I had it placed right here on this PV speaker, and all of a sudden this song book started shooting back toward the back of the auditorium at 100 miles an hour, hit the back and shattered into 1,000 pages. And you said, Kyle, what caused that songbook to launch across the room? And I say, whew. Said, you should have seen it. I was standing here, and as I was speaking to you, a big, fat, monstrous housefly landed on the edge of that book and catapulted it to the back of the auditorium. Would you believe that? Every effect has to have a cause that came before it that was greater than it. It's got to be bigger than the effect the cause does. You know, for instance, suppose you're driving down the interstate, you're going 70 miles an hour, and you look over to your right, and there is a UPS truck. It's got 2 trailers on it, and he's driving about 70 miles an hour, and all of a sudden that UPS truck comes to a screeching halt, does 6 flips, and lands in the ditch. You quickly pull over, dial 911 on your cell phone, and then you get out to see if the UPS driver is okay. There he is. He's all right. You say, Mr. UPS driver, what caused you to wreck? And he said his eyes got big as saucers. And he said, you got to tell everybody to get off the highway right now. And I thought to myself, yeah, this guy hit his head a little too hard. And he said, I'll tell you what caused me to wreck. I was driving down the interstate, and about 100 yards away, I saw the biggest mosquito you have ever seen, and that mosquito planted into my grill and stopped my truck dead in its tracks. Would you buy that? No, because the cause, the mosquito planting into the grill of the truck, is not greater than the effect. Now, maybe you've been to the Mississippi River. You look on the banks of the Mississippi River, and we're going to have to speak hypothetically, of course, because we're going to say, just for the sake of argument, that the Mississippi River is clear as a bell. Hypothetically, of course. And we're looking down there and we see some catfish swimming around, and we think, this is great. Of course, the Mississippi River is normally muddy. Today it's clear as a bell. I might actually catch a catfish or two. So we get our fishing pole and we bait it up with some good, juicy chicken liver, and we drop it right in front of one of those catfish. And all of a sudden, right before we get ready to catch our fish, the entire river goes muddy. The huge Mississippi River. The Mississippi River dumps 6,052,000 gallons of water per second in the Gulf of Mexico. And it all goes muddy just like that. And we're not going to catch any catfish today, so we walk up the bank to see if we can find the cause. And we come to a gentleman who's sitting there, had been catching catfish earlier that day, and we say, sir, did you see what caused the Mississippi River to go muddy? And he says, yes, sir, I sure did. He said, I was sitting here, all of a sudden, a huge bullfrog jumped into the Mississippi, hit the bottom. That mud that he stirred up caused the entire Mississippi to go muddy. Would you believe that? No, because the cause is not big enough for the effect. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the generally accepted scientific explanation of the universe? Here is the answer. According to modern science, about 15 billion years ago, a tiny dot of matter the size of a period at the end of a sentence exploded and caused this entire universe. Now think about that just for a second. A tiny, dense ball of matter about the size of a dot at the end of a sentence in a book. Well, how big really is the universe? I mean, maybe the universe isn't all that big, and maybe a tiny dot or ball of matter could explain it. Let's see how big the universe really is. Several hundred years ago, in fact several thousand, it was about 152 BC, I think, a man by the name of Hipparchus looked up in the sky and he said, I am going to count the stars. And he started counting. I don't know if you've ever tried to count the stars, but very difficult task. He started counting and he counted about 1,026. Quite a few stars. Well, a guy came by later in about 1575 named Tycho Brahe. And he said, nah, he's way off. There are 777 stars. Well, a guy came by later, about 1600, a man by the name of Johannes Kepler. And Kepler said, no, he is way off. There are about 1,005 stars. Now we've got telescopes that we can look into outer space with, and in our galaxy alone, there are an estimated 100 billion stars. Now, how big is our galaxy, and how many galaxies are there? Our galaxy, if I were to ask you what galaxy we live in the Milky Way galaxy. Did you know there are an estimated 2 billion galaxies? And ours is just one out of those estimated 2 billion. Now, suppose we wanted to travel across our one galaxy. Now, this is just one out of estimated 2 billion. And now, it's kind of hard to get your mind around the word billion. Let me put it to you this way. If you wanted to spend, you went to your mom and you said, hey mom, I need some money. And your mom said, well, how much money do you need? You said, oh, $3,000. And she said, $3,000? You said, yeah, I need $3,000 every day this week. And next week, and next week, and next week. Do you know how long it would take you to spend $1 million, spending it $3,000? And I'm sure that you guys could creatively spend $3,000 a day. Probably after about 3 months, though, it'd be getting hard to think up things to buy. You know how long it would take you? It would take you about 3 years or so. Now suppose you wanted to spend $1 billion at $3,000 a day. You know how long it will take you? About 821 years to spend $1 billion or so. Somewhere around there. It's a huge number. And there are an estimated 2 billion galaxies in the universe. And ours is just one. Well, maybe our galaxy isn't that big. Maybe not. I have a 1993 forest green extended cab SEV6 Nissan four-wheel drive truck with a beautiful tool box in the back. The engine on this thing, let's just say when you press the gas, this truck goes. But we're going to soup this truck up just a little. And we're going to say that it's going to be able to travel the speed of light. That's about 186,000 miles per second. That's 7 times around the earth in 1 second. Okay, exaggerating. My truck will almost go that fast, but not quite. But we're going to soup it up and say that it does. And we're going to say that my truck can now fly. And we're going to pile everybody up in the back of the truck. And we're going to take off going the speed of light. Okay. We got our goggles on. G-forces are pulling our face back. Our hair. Okay, we're going the speed of light. Do you know how long it's going to take us to get across our one galaxy? Going the speed of light now. That's 26 sextillion, that's 5 quintillion miles a year, I think, our time. Something like that. Okay, we're going the speed of light. We're in my truck. We're going across our one galaxy. Remember, this is one out of estimated 2 billion. One galaxy. You know how long it's going to take us? 10 years? 20 years? 30 years? 50? Going the speed of light. 100? It's going to take us over 100,000 years. Going the speed of light. Now, who's got that kind of time? Not me, and that's just one galaxy out of an estimated 2 billion. Now suppose we say, well, we don't really want to go across our whole galaxy. We just want to go to our nearest neighbor. We don't want to go all the way across our nearest neighbor, Andromeda. Okay, now I'm souping my truck up even more. We're going to put high octane gas. We're going to put the 93% instead of 87% in it now. Now it can travel the speed of a micro radio wave, going about 8 times around the equator in 1 second. Faster than the speed of light. Our nearest neighbor now, out of estimated 2 billion galaxies, you know how long it's going to take us to get to our nearest neighbor? About 750,000 years. Now that's 2 out of an estimated 2 billion galaxies. Now, does a tiny ball of matter about the size of a period at the end of a sentence give us a big enough cause for this effect of the universe? Absolutely not. What could give us a big enough cause? Well, if we said that there was a God that was all-powerful, that could do anything that it took power to, would that give us a big enough cause? Yeah. But, hold up just a second. Wait just a second. You know what the evolutionist says? It says, you're busted right there. Once you say that God did it, you just broke the law of cause and effect. Because didn't we say for every effect there had to be a cause that came before it and that was greater than it? What caused God? Now hold on just a second. You know how important one word is in a sentence sometimes? I mean, suppose that you went up to your girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, and you said, "Dear, I love you." What would you be telling them? Well, of course, you'd be telling them that you love them. Now suppose you add one 3-letter, tiny little word. "Dear, I love you not." Now, did you just change the entire meaning of the sentence? Yep, the entire. In fact, it now means something opposite of what it meant before. Now, when we said the definition of cause and effect, did we say for every effect there has to be a cause that comes before it and that's greater than it? Is that what we said? Think hard. No, that's not what we said. We said for every material effect there has to be a cause that came before it and that was greater than. You see, all that science can measure are material things. I mean, suppose that we had Zach up here and suppose that we had Sarah up here and we said, okay, we want to measure which of these two is the bravest. And we gathered 100,000 of the most brilliant scientists and we said, okay, let's get your tools out and things and just measure for us which of these two has the most courage. Well, is there a beaker or a measuring tape or something that they could look inside of their heads and measure who was the bravest? Well, that means neither one of them must have any courage. No. You know, could you measure how much your mother loves you? Is there a scientific experiment that could be done on your mother to quantify, tell you how much she loves you? Absolutely not. Because science can only deal with what you can see, what you can touch, what you can taste, what you can hear, what you can smell. Science cannot deal with things that are not material. Is God material? In John chapter 4, verse 24, the Bible says that God is a spirit. Why does the law of cause and effect not apply to God? Because God is outside of the universe. He is not a material being, and the law of cause and effect simply does not apply to God. That's the first law that points to a creator. Here's the second law. According to evolution, last night we went over this. For those of you who were not there last night, listen closely. According to evolution, about 4 billion years ago, there was a huge primordial soup. A bunch of chemicals that were warming up, sitting on the Earth's surface. Somehow electricity shot through those chemicals. Those chemicals turned into the first form of life, a single-celled amoeba. That single-celled amoeba, through natural selection and mutations, gradually evolved into multi-celled bacteria. That multi-celled bacteria, through time and evolution and mutations, supposedly evolved into those creatures with no backbones, the invertebrates. Those invertebrates supposedly evolved through countless years of mutations and natural selection into the vertebrates, and then the fish, and then the amphibians, and then the lizards, and then the mammals, and then the primates, and then the humans. But when you go back to the very beginning of that, supposedly, somewhere in the past, non-living chemicals produced life. But there is a law called the law of biogenesis. Now, what does the term bio mean? You go to a biology class and you study life. Bio means life or living things. What does Genesis mean? Genesis is the first book in the Old Testament. It means the beginning. The law of biogenesis is the beginning of life. Here's all it says. Life on this earth comes from life of its own kind that existed before it. Now, you might think that everybody understands that. But they didn't understand that for a long time. In fact, in about 1660, a man named Francisco Redi was having some very serious problems. Because the people of his day thought that maggots popped out of meat. Yeah, they're spontaneously generated. You put a big T-bone steak on your kitchen counter, come back in 2 weeks, it's got maggots all over it. Where did those maggots come from? They just pop out of it. Well, Francisco Redi said, I don't really believe that. So, he did an experiment. He put meat in the bottom of a jar and sealed it so that nothing could get in. Then he put meat in the bottom of a jar and left it open. And he watched it. Flies landed on the open jar. Flies couldn't get in the sealed jar. No maggots formed on the sealed jar. Maggots did form on the open jar. Francisco Redi said, that's it. I have solved the mystery. Flies produce maggots. Well, his critics said, no, you haven't solved the mystery. The reason that the maggots did not produce was because you wouldn't let air get into the meat, and air is what causes them to spontaneously generate. So he said, okay, we'll fix that. So he put a netting type material on top of one of the jars, like a gauze. Like if you cut your leg and it's a gauze type substance that you would get at the doctor, put that over it so that air could get in, but flies couldn't. And guess what? Since the flies couldn't get into the meat, no maggots formed on the meat. Francisco Redi said, there it is. Maggots do not spontaneously generate from meat. Okay, the scientific world said, oh, okay, I guess you're right. But we still think that microscopic tiny organisms spontaneously generate in meat broth and things like that. For the next 200 years, people kept believing in spontaneous generation. Now, remember, 200 years from 1660, that takes us up to about 1860. Now, that was only, you're looking at 140 years ago. A man by the name of Louis Pasteur came along and said, guys, this idea of spontaneous generation is absolutely wrong, and I'm going to prove it once and for all. So he took some liquid that would produce these microscopic organisms ordinarily, and he boiled it and killed them all. And then he put a S-shaped curve on the flask, a glass S-shaped curve. It was designed so that all of the tiny organisms would get caught right there in the bottom of the S shape. He sat the broth, the liquid there, microscoped in on it, and waited for any organisms to form. None formed. Out of all of the jars that he boiled, none formed. Then he broke the neck off so that the air could get back in, and they did start to form. What Louis Pasteur proved once and for all to everybody was that life only comes from life. In fact, I have read that there are still some of the original jars that were boiled with the S-shaped curves on them that have not to this day produced any microorganisms. When you picked up your gallon of milk this morning, or your orange juice glass, if you were to look on the side of that orange juice glass, you might have seen that word pasteurized, homogenized and pasteurized. Well, that word pasteurized on your milk doesn't mean that the cows lived in a pasture that produced your milk. It means that this liquid has gone through the process that Louis Pasteur designed almost 150 years ago. He proved once and for all what every one of us knows. Life only comes from life of its own kind. Let me tell you a quick story. When we were driving from Colorado in Denver to Tennessee, we had a dog. I was a little bitty kid, probably about, I'm going to say 5, 6, 7, and this dog's name was Max. And Max actually was a Maxine, but we didn't find that out until later, so we named her Max, and then we stretched it to Maxine, but really we just always called her Max. And Max was about to have babies. And at my house, when an animal was about to have babies, you put the animal in the bathtub. Why you put the animal in the bathtub at my house when it was about to have babies, I do not exactly know. But that's what we did at my house. And we put Max in the bathtub. And we got up the next morning to see if Max had had her babies, and sure enough, there they were. 10 of the most beautiful baby hippopotamuses you have ever seen. You believe that? No, of course you don't believe that. Because you know that if a dog is going to have babies, that dog always produces puppies. If a cat is going to have babies, that cat always produces iguanas. No, never produces iguanas. It always produces cats. There has never been in all of human history a verified instance where some type of life produced some other type of life. A cow always produces a calf. A cat always produces kittens. Dogs always produce puppies. Humans always produce humans. That's how it always goes. In fact, that's what the law of biogenesis says. The law of biogenesis says that when you have life, it came from life that came before it and life of its own kind. Now, let's think about our two working theories here. One of them's a theory, one of them's a fact. Creation says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and He created the animals and told them to produce after their own kind. Exactly what we see in nature. But evolution says that somewhere in the distant past, non-living chemicals gave rise to life, and that life produced different kinds of life over millions of years. Now, which one of those two ideas goes with the evidence? Creation does. Evolution simply does not. Now, there's one more that is very, very obvious, and it's very, very simple. Here's all it says. In nature, when you see design, you know for a fact that there was a designer. Here's all that means. You're walking on the beach. You look down, and there in the sand, you read, "Kyle loves Bethany." And you look to your mother or your father, and you say, "What do you think caused that?" And your mother or your father says, "Well, I can tell you exactly what I think caused that. I think that last night when the tide came up, several seashells and things like some kelp and maybe even a fish fin or two were washed onto the beach, and because they were washed onto the beach, they got mingled around together, and all of those things that were washed onto the beach produced that thing that you see there." Now, are you going to believe that? Now, let's put it this way. Suppose you're walking through the woods somewhere, and you look down, and there is a laptop computer. It's got a Pentium 2700 processor that has 48,000 gigahertz of processing ability. You can hold 6,000 tons of RAM and such, and it goes faster than any computer that there is. And you say, well, how'd that get here? And somebody that's walking with you said, I know how that got here. Last night it started to rain, and that rain mixed the mud and the dirt up with some leaves and some twigs, and over a period of time those leaves, twigs, dirt, mud caused this computer. Do you believe that? No. But now what if I told you about a computer, weighs about 3 pounds, the fastest computer ever designed. In fact, every computer that we have been able to make up to this point can only store about 1/10,000th of the information that this 3-pound computer can store. It doesn't use metal, any kind of metal. It stores chemicals, and those chemicals store the information. It sends information at about 300 miles an hour. It takes in information by the millions and billions of bits. In fact, this computer can at least learn 40 different languages. This computer can originate thoughts. No computer that we have ever designed can originate a thought. You know, suppose it was your first day of school and you were in the 6th grade, and the teacher said, "Class, got something I'd like to show you, someone I'd like to introduce you to." And you're like, "Okay, great, new student." And she opens the door, and in walks a jerky, 6th grade size robot named Chip. And the teacher says, "Hello, this is Chip. Chip was designed by a corps of scientists. Took them 10 years to design Chip. Took them over $100 million. Chip is the most advanced robot on the market. Ask him any question." So they started asking Chip questions. How do you say hello in Spanish? How do you say hello in French? Where is... And just question after question after question. Chip knew every one of them. And then the class clown, Billy, stands up and he says, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" And Chip, "I'm sorry, I do not understand the question." Of course, he wouldn't get it. It's a joke. He wouldn't get the question. Now suppose that your teacher says, "Class, I'd like to introduce you to somebody." She opens the door, and there is Susie, the new student. She's a real human. She doesn't have that jerky motion. She walks right in. You ask her several questions. Of course, she doesn't know all the Spanish and the French, etc., but she can tell you where she is from. And then Billy stands up and says, "Why did the chicken cross the road?" And she gets the joke. Now, if we were to say, did scientists design Chip? Yeah. Took millions of dollars and thousands of hours. Now you've got a real human being, and that computer, by the way, that weighed 3 pounds, it feels like unbaked bread dough if you touch it. The surgeons who work on it say, your brain. If scientists were to produce a computer that could do the things that your brain can do, it would take them over $100 billion, and it would take the energy that it would take to run an entire city. And it would have to be a computer about the size of a several-story high building, and even then it couldn't originate a thought. And yet Chip, we all know, was designed. But that new student that walked in, who was just an average, ordinary 5th grader, was a product of chance over multiplied millions of years. Folks, when you see design, you have to know that there was a designer. Isaac Newton was one of the most intelligent scientists of his day. He was a creationist, believed in God. Several, of course, of his friends did not. Isaac Newton, one day, the story is told, invited one of his atheistic friends over to his house. He had gone down to the nearest carpentry shop and had told the carpenter to design a scale model of the universe. Paint it, make it where you can turn a crank and it will spin. Make sure everything looks exactly as close to the real universe as we can make it. The carpenter friend did that. Isaac Newton picks up the model, brings it to his house. The atheistic friend passes by the model of the universe and says, "Wow, Sir Isaac Newton, that is amazing. Do you mind if I stop and see it?" Isaac Newton said, "No, feel free." So his atheistic friend stops and he looks at it and the intricate design in the painting, and it's just about perfect. And he turns the crank and the planets start to spin exactly like they do in the universe. And he said, "This is amazing. Who designed this for you?" Isaac Newton said, "Nobody designed it for me. It just popped out of nowhere." And the friend chuckled a little bit and said, "Sir Isaac, I know that's not true. Who designed this for you?" And Isaac Newton said, "Nobody. Nobody designed it. Just popped." And the friend started getting on. He said, "I demand that you tell me who designed this model of the universe." Sir Isaac said, "Friend, if you don't believe that this crude model of the universe just popped out of nowhere by chance, then how in the world do you expect me to believe that this intricate universe after which this model was designed just popped out by chance?" Several years ago, it was 1976, a man by the name of Thomas Warren, was a member of the church, very, very educated man, had a doctorate in philosophy from Vanderbilt University. He was debating a man by the name of Anthony Flew. And in this debate, Thomas Warren used an argument like this. He put up a prosthetic hand on the screen. A prosthetic hand is a fake hand. The best fake hand that scientists have been able to design, that medical doctors have been able to produce to help people who have lost a limb, maybe in an accident or in the war. Put up one of those fake hands and he said, "Mr. Flew." Mr. Flew was the atheist of the day, one of the most prominent atheists. And he said, "Mr. Flew, look at this fake artificial hand." He said, "Was this artificial hand designed by someone?" Mr. Flew said, "Yes." Did the same thing with the eyeball. Then Thomas Warren put up a picture of a real hand. And he said, "Mr. Flew, do you see this real hand? It can do much more than that artificial hand, can't it?" He said, "Was this real human hand designed?" And Mr. Flew said, "No." And then Thomas Warren said, "Well, how did it get there?" And Mr. Flew said, "It just grew there. Just grew there. Can do so much more than the artificial hand, but it just grew there." Do you remember last night when we said a man by the name of Richard Dawkins said that if you meet anybody who believes in creation, that person is either stupid, ignorant, insane, or wicked? But I'd rather not consider that last one. After looking at the facts, does Mr. Dawkins' statement make much sense? No, the truth is the scientific facts point only to one of two ideas, either creation or evolution. And I think what we've seen this morning in the first lesson is it's not evolution.